What's up, guys, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I want to talk to you about some tips for efficiency in the studio. No making of video this week because it's a VIP, so there's not really a lot that's new to show. As some of you may already know, I am in the middle of my second year in college, going for an engineering degree, and so that's really time-consuming, tiring, and mental energy consuming, so I don't get a ton of time to work on music. Since I want to keep improving at a steady pace and want to keep my uploads consistent, I've tried to find kind of ways to make my production time more efficient, so here are 4 things that have helped me with that. First off is to save presets and samples. And this is not just self-made samples or presets either, this is just anything from any song that worked well in that song, so it'll probably work well again in another song. This is actually how my Gabe Miller drums sample packs started out. I would just dump samples into there that I liked, that worked well, so I could refer back to them, use them again. So there are a lot of samples that actually pop up quite often in songs. For instance, this hi-hat loop that's playing in the background from my song New Year has popped up in a lot of other songs that I've made. With some producers, there seems to be this mentality that you can't use the same kick or snare sample twice, but people do it all the time. For instance, on Zed's album Clarity, he uses only about 2 or 3 kicks, and it sounds really good. It creates some consistency, and no one minds that it's the same sample. It works. And I'll do this with synth presets as well. Once a song's completely finished, I'll go into the session file and just save each channel strip that has the synthesizer, its preset, and then all my processing, and then I can just bring those into new projects whenever I happen to need them. I kind of remember what different songs I've made sound like and what sounds I may have saved that I can reuse later. This is great because it not only creates a bank of familiar sounds that you can refer to and find the sound you're looking for quickly, but also helps with mixing and speeds it up. Since I've already got EQs on there, I've already tweaked stuff to sound good within the context of a song, I can drop it in there and it probably will only require a couple minor tweaks to work within the context of whatever new song I'm working on. So the way I do this is I just organize these all into folders, like each song is a folder, and then put a bunch of presets inside there, and so I can bring it out whenever I need to. So one example of this working really well is some of the supersaws from Skyhook. I had these big supersaw chords playing, and I saved some of those patches, and it's in particular 2 supersaws that I had layered and processed to just make this big chord stack, and I've used that over and over again, including as recently as the Nervo remix. Saving presets and samples saves on actual time spent working on stuff, but it's also kind of a psychological thing, because a blank slate is kind of a scary thing, and so to be able to know that I can pull in a bunch of sounds and immediately have something that sounds somewhat cohesive is a really nice feeling to have. It helps lessen that fear of the unknown that you kind of have when looking at a blank DAW template. And I don't just do this with finished tracks either. I've also done it with unfinished tracks quite a bit. A really good example of this is I was working on this 8-bar breakbeat loop, and it kind of sucked. You couldn't really develop it into a full song, it wasn't interesting, it wasn't musically very interesting, the production on it wasn't very good, so I ended up just entirely scrapping it, except for one little bass element I designed in Serum. That's this sound right here, which ended up becoming the main bass element in the drop of my Nervo remix. The second tip is to make yourself a template. Now, this should not be complicated, just enough to do some of the kind of menial stuff that you do when starting off a project anyway. So for instance, I always need to load up Ultrabeat, and I usually load up a couple of plugins to try to figure out what note a kick is hitting at, and so that's just a little bit of time spent, but to have that ready right when you start a new project is really nice and can help save a little bit of time, a little bit of thought, and it adds up. So for my template, I have the Ultrabeat channel, I have a track for bass, and a track for chords, and a track for a lead, and those are all color-coded so that I can immediately start putting in notes and have everything be color-coded to what I need it, so I can find stuff quickly within the project later on as it starts getting more dense. All the different elements, I can just look at a color and see, oh, this is this element. And then I also have a dubstep template with a bunch of kicks and snares loaded in, an LFO tool set up with all the kind of the routing and bussing necessary to make that trigger whenever a kick hits. You may want to do the same thing with a compressor that's set up to already sidechain, or have some sends for reverb and delay. Having these 2 templates allows me to jump immediately into working on a track, as opposed to having to do any setup or even think about it. It also helps defeat some of that fear of looking at a blank session and going, oh boy, what the heck do I do? I gotta fill all this stuff in. There's already stuff in there, so I can just go. My third tip is to use non-production time to learn. For instance, at the moment, I take the public transit to school, and so I've got this time spent on the bus. You know, sometimes I'll use to do homework, especially if it's kind of reading based, but for a lot of it, it's a lot of working problems. I'd have to have all this stuff spread out, and doing homework on the bus is not usually feasible, so it's just kind of this blank time spent doing nothing productive. So now I fill that up with time spent learning production-related stuff. So I download a lot of production-related videos to my trusty iPod Touch, and then just watch them on the bus. So these are sound design tutorials, videos of people just working on music. So for instance, some of Virtual Riot's live streams or deadmau5's live streams are great for this. I learned how to use Serum just by watching a bunch of stuff on the bus. And I'll also use commutes and other stuff like washing the dishes or getting ready for bed to listen to podcasts. So for instance, the EDM podcast, or the Producer podcast, or the Sound Design Show, or the Simply Recording podcast, Home Studio Corner, the Inner Tube, and Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. Any kind of blank time that doesn't require my full mental concentration, I'll put in a podcast and be able to be learning while I'm doing other stuff. So I double count my time. And I produce on a desktop computer. I don't have a laptop, but I do know of people who use their laptops to produce during things like lunch breaks. I also use bus time to sometimes even write melodies. There's this great app called Oxy for iOS, and I'll put a link to it in the description, but basically it's kind of a MIDI sequencer with a bunch of built-in sounds. For instance, I wrote the melodies for Spark and for the breakdown of Rocket Powered Horse on that app, and used it to plan out sections of other songs, such as Orbit. It's a great little app for demoing song ideas and coming up with new ones. So those are some of the things I use to maximize my non-production time. If you have any others, leave them in the comments. I'd love to know things you do to keep learning or generating ideas when you're not working on music. And my fourth and final tip is to listen to music and study it to get unstuck. For instance, a while back I was having trouble on a build-up. It just wasn't flowing, it wasn't working for me, it sounded empty. None of that was working, and so I just went and listened to a bunch of songs kind of in the vein I was going for that had good build-ups. And I actually took out a piece of paper and wrote notes on what I heard, things they automated, things they changed, elements they brought in and took out. All these ideas that I was then able to apply to my own build-up. Another good place to do this is with arrangements. I did this on my track Distance. I just grabbed a couple of songs that were somewhat in that vein and actually just drew a line and then a bunch of notches that were supposed to represent 8-bar sections, and then just wrote what elements came in, what dropped out, what changed, and then I was able to combine a couple of those arrangements to create my own that ended up being pretty quick to put together. And stuff like this doesn't just make you faster, it makes you better. I could talk about studying music all day. I think it's a really important thing for producers to do that is sometimes overlooked, but that is where I'm going to end today's video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, hopefully you found it helpful for your own productions. I will be back with a new song next week, and until then, I'll see you next time. Peace!